Well, hi, Kepler families and teachers. Welcome to another live. And today we are welcoming chemistry teacher Matt Sanders. Hi, Matt. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for listening today.
Yeah, well, you are a professor at Azusa University right now. You also indulge in various other platforms for teaching science.
Yes.
You're not only an enthusiast and a scholar for things scientific, but you're particularly passionate about the intersection of faith and science. And that's something we want to kind of arc toward to as we have our conversation. But before we do that, maybe just introduce us to the man, Matt Sanders.
Okay. That's a big question. Well, I guess in general, I've loved science since I was a little kid. And I became a Christian as a teenager. And so I feel very blessed to be one of those people that I get to do what I love. And I've been passionate both about the Lord and about science pretty much my whole life. And I've been teaching most of my life in various, mostly Christian schools, private institutions, high schools, and college. And so I feel very blessed because to me there's so much intersection between good science and strong faith, and I think maybe science is one of the more obvious subject areas where the two go together, and where the more closely we look at nature, the more obvious it becomes that somebody made this.
Yeah. So, I was recently interviewing a biology teacher and reading their course descriptions. And in reading your course description, it sounded like you guys were kind of just talking off the same page. The same things that you were passionate to communicate. So have you been in a Christian environment as a scientist for most of your career?
Not as a scientist, but as an educator. So in private Christian schools, I've been at APU. You had mentioned Azusa Pacific for 20 years now as an adjunct professor, and so your student body in institutions like that, as everybody knows, is a wide mixture of kids who have strong faith, people who don't have any faith at all, but maybe their parents are Christians and they want them in a Christian institution, and everywhere in between. And
right.
So I just have always, I love teaching, and I've always felt kind of called. I've done a lot of kind of ministry things on the side as well. But I really see my teaching as integral to who I am and to my call, and that a big part of what I'm doing in teaching and what I'm here for is to help build faith in young people. I just remember when I was a high school and college student, at various times when I had teachers or even guest lecturers who would come, some of them I can still see them, and how it stuck with me as a young believer and still questioning a lot of things, and how does all this fit together? And here's a guy who very obviously is an expert in science and loves the Lord and takes his word as written, and wow, that's amazing. And just those impressions that stuck with me and when I was a student. And so I hope to do the same thing for my students, I guess.
I think about my own upbringing. I definitely took after my mom, who was an English teacher. She was an English as a second language teacher. I was as well. I read the authors that she loved, etc.
Yeah.
And I inherited other things from my dad. My dad is a mathematician, and it always kind of struck me that he said this once. He only said this once in my entire life, and it wasn't even to me, but I was in the room, and he just made the comment that when people found out he was a Christian, because he's doing math, there's not always reason to know. There was immediately a sort of you could see them struggling to still respect him, right? There was a respect before, and I just remember overhearing that and being really struck by it. Was a thought that hadn't occurred to me because I'd been brought up as a Christian, but it's a thing that's very real in academia.
Oh yeah, and I guess I haven't had to deal with a lot of that because I've been mostly in Christian institutions,
right.
High school and college. And so I just, I've had also a personal kind of quest or interest in the whole origins issue,
Mhm.
where science and faith really does
Yeah.
come together. And starting in college, I guess I really started looking into that in detail for myself. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this for students, is that my own kind of quest and investigation in that has only cemented my faith and has only built, my conviction that there's no way that all of this happened by chance or aliens or anything else. You know what I mean?
Wait a second. Where did the aliens come from?
When you mentioned that line, that you heard from your dad about respect, I know that in the mainstream science world, it is not respected to claim that there's a creator. I'm thoroughly familiar with that, and yet I guess what I'm saying is I'm so sure that I'm right and that the science points to a creator that I don't have any trouble being proud of that. Mm-hmm. And I really want my students to pick that up and to know that as well, because they're going to face all the same things. I mean, a lot of these high school students are going to go to secular colleges, and they're going to be made fun of, and they're going to be ridiculed for those beliefs. And I just feel like as much as they can and as fast as they can, they better get some foundation for why does faith make sense, and I should mention too that a big part of what I like to kind of sit on is intelligent design. I'm sure you're familiar with that, and that's a lot in Christian circles. That's a large umbrella, right? Or a large camp, I guess. And it's almost a slam dunk position, intelligent design, right? And so I focus a lot on that, and I really love that topic, I guess.
You actually work with an intelligent design foundation or organization, I should say.
Do you mean Institute for Creation Research?
Yes. Yes, that's right. I'm sorry.
So my degree, I studied there.
Okay.
I don't currently work with them, but I did. That's where I did my graduate work. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Apologies for that. All right. Well, let's talk about your course a little bit, and then I'd like to kind of get back to. I mean, what you've been talking about is really a philosophical quest. We're doing natural philosophy, and in the spirit of integration. I mean, it's I think it's so tempting for many Christians to kind of compartmentalize science, maybe use it operationally and not philosophically. But it really is. I mean, like so many other things, it's something that has a lot of levels, and there's a meta level to this. So I definitely want to explore that. But before we do that, let's actually kind of get into the nuts and bolts of your class.
Yeah.
Simply titled Chemistry. Chemistry is a requirement for most states to graduate from high school, and so it's a requirement for many homeschoolers. It is a part of our 11th grade diploma track suggested course of study. And so you have here, you're using the book Discovering Design with Chemistry by Dr. Jay Weil. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that book.
There we go. I've been using Dr. Weil's stuff for a number of years. I really like it. It is actually, it's written for a homeschooler, so the content is really not any different from a traditional high school chemistry book. But it, the labs in there are things that most people can do at home with a minimal amount of purchase of equipment and things like that. The other thing that's it's challenging to do labs at home. So maybe we should talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, just the fact that you're already, you've chosen a curriculum that's oriented towards homeschoolers, which already makes it sound ideal for our online platform. Yeah, how does lab at home work? One of our teachers is having students buy a cow's eyeball to slice it open.
Yeah.
I don't know how challenging that will be, but yeah, how do labs in an online class work?
Well, we were all online at the end of last year, and so I teach at 3 different high school homeschool centers. I should mention that as well, and maybe we can talk about that in a few minutes. And so for the last 2 months of those classes, we were all at home, and so we were all kind of scrambling because normally we would be doing labs in class, and I also teach biology and chemistry at these homeschool centers here in LA. And so yeah, we were scrambling to do labs at home. My plan for Kepler is to provide a list of simple equipment that would need to be purchased, and it's actually less than I expected. Probably less than biology, because in biology you're dealing with dissection samples and an expensive microscope or a cheap one that doesn't work very well, things like that. But in chemistry, with a I don't have the total yet, but I think it's less than $100 of simple glassware. You're set for the year, and because then you can use a stove when you need heat. You can go to the drugstore and get an awful lot of things, and that $100 would include a few chemicals and things that Dr. Weil has really put together strategically so that so you're not maybe buying something to use once and you've paid $20 for it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that works well, I've been doing this for a long time now, and this will be both for my in-person and my online classes, is there's a lot of math. Everybody knows there's a lot of math in chemistry, and students often need some help and review with that. And there's a bit of new math in each chapter. And so what I do is for the second half of each class, the lab portion of each week, first, let's say we spend 2 weeks, typically 2 weeks on a chapter. The first of those weeks would be a math kind of a tutoring sessions to introduce the students to the math that they need for that chapter. Some of them already know it, some of them are brand new, and some in the middle. And so, we do a couple of worksheets and have kind of a tutoring time to get them up to speed on whatever they need for that chapter.
Right.
And then the second week, if it's in person, would be the lab. I'm having them do that at home, and then we'll be, during that second lab time, we'll be discussing that lab, talking about any issues or problems and what it meant, and then introducing the lab for the next week. So it's kind of a lab discussion time. And I'll be providing, of course, all the procedures and interpretation and things like that for the students. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised how they could buy what they needed ahead of time, and then from week to week there might be some hydrogen peroxide or something like that you need from the drugstore. So
right. Yeah. The math tutorial thing sounds like the voice of experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because homeschool students are all over the place. I mean public school students are all over the place in terms of what they need, and so this helps to kind of standardize what they know for each chapter.
Yeah, this is actually the second live I've done today that has touched on doing chemistry at home. We just got done with a home economics classes being offered, and the teacher was joking about mixing bleach and ammonia. So, so the theme today seems to be home chemistry.
Well, and the other good thing is that not all, but most homeschool parents want to be involved with things like this. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of doing something that might potentially be dangerous or something like that, most parents, are happy for someone to provide a procedure and the materials and all that, and they want to, they want to be involved with their kids. That's why they're homeschooling, right? It's
right.
Generally, I think it's not going to be a high school kid doing these things by themselves, though they could if they needed to.
Yes, it is easy to picture mom and dad fiddling with the tubes and trying to mix stuff themselves. I could see the fun in that. Now, looking at your course objectives, you start with the philosophical, right? Have a better understanding of the created world and the majesty of the Creator. So chemistry is a personal science for you. It's a way of getting to know God. And then you hit the kind of the brass tacks type of objectives, table of elements and trends therein, basic lab equipment and its use, kinetic theory of matter, thermodynamics, atomic structure, stoichiometric calculations.
Oh my goodness!
maybe talk a little bit about some of those types of studies, why we're going to study them, and how much fun and work it will be.
Okay. Well, stoichiometry is just a fun word to say, anyways. And,
yes, it is.
Kids learn that word, you sound smart. All it means is quantifying things, right? It's the balancing equations and working with grams and kilograms and moles of things and stuff like that. I'm always reminding my students that chemistry, to a non-chemist or someone who hasn't studied this, it seems, what's the word, obtuse or I'm not sure. It seems irrelevant maybe to daily life, right? Like the old T-shirt that says, another day went by and I didn't use algebra,
Right.
I guess we need one of those for chemistry. But I remind them that I give this little illustration. You go to the mall. I say, how many different kinds of products might be sold in a typical mall? And they'll say 1 million, whatever. And I say, how many of those required the work of a chemist to manufacture that thing? They think about it for a minute and they go, wow, like all of them? I go, yeah. And I said, can you name me one that did not require the work of a chemist? And generally they can't. I mean, sometimes they'll say, the peanuts at the organic food place, and I go, yeah, but they're packaged in something, right? They're in plastic.
Those students will try with the gotcha questions.
Yeah.
Well, but here's a question that springs to mind when you say that, which is, okay, that's all well and good as far as justification for me being a chemist. I am now interested in embarking upon the career of being a chemist. But what if that's not what I'm actually going to do? Yeah. How does that mall idea and the importance of chemistry everywhere affect me if I don't actually become a chemist?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I would say a couple of things. I mean, like we started out with, a greater appreciation for God and His majesty and wisdom, and oh my goodness, it goes on and on and on. Almost every chapter, you see something of how incredibly wise He is to build things this way, and how things just wouldn't work, some other way. And so, as I said, an appreciation for the wonder of creation. It's easy to see, when you look at a tree or a mountain or the sunset or something like that. But I really think that with courses like biology and chemistry, the deeper you go, in other words, you don't have to study biology or chemistry to appreciate the greatness of God. But the more you do, and the more you know about that, I think it peels back layers, perhaps. How amazing is this one who put all this together? Who thought all this up and put it all together? I think hopefully for any high school course, there's a certain amount of discipline and rigor and training the mind to work and think and expand into new things that you hadn't thought about before. And so in general, I think chemistry fits into that category of we would call it liberal arts, I guess, right? Having a great, both in training your skills at working and thinking, but then content-wise, having a wider appreciation of the world and And I understand that. I mean, like what 1 or 2% of my students might be interested in being a chemist, and so that's certainly not my mission, is to try to get them to become chemists. But I think that's why your question is appropriate. I think that there's a lot of benefits just to have a deeper and greater awareness of the world in which I live. I think that's important.
Yeah.
I would say that even if a person is not coming from a Christian perspective, right? I mean, the liberal arts have a 1,000-year history, whether that involves faith or not. I mean, it's been considered to be important. So.
Yes. And, I end up saying this on every stream in which we feature a science teacher, but we chose Kepler as our namesake for a very specific reason.
Yeah.
We wanted a scientist, a Christian scientist, as our namesake, because STEM is liberal arts, right?
Yeah.
We're not trying to attach it or make sure we do a good job while you're studying Greek. It's all part and parcel, and then it's a vital part of an integrated education.
Yeah. Well, I read a little bit about why that name was chosen, and I love it. I think it's great. Yeah, and guys like that, students need to know about guys like that, because those were the heroes. Those were the academic heroes of those years, and a lot of them were strong people of faith. So
right.
That's very cool.
And so many were integrated scholars, right? Cross-disciplinary scholars. There wasn't, the divisions that we make now didn't exist then. And I think, that was very healthy. Sean Bonet asks the question: what special insight about the world does chemistry give to us? What perspective does it give us that no other discipline does?
Okay. Great question. What special insight about the world does chemistry give us? Well, I think I answered that a bit. I don't want to repeat myself, but in my comments a few minutes ago, everything is really based on chemistry, right? I mean, because everything is based on molecules, and modern chemistry, like it or not, is half the course is the study of atoms and molecules, because we now know so much about the fundamental structure of matter. And so before you even touch the chemicals and the periodic table and all that, you got to spend a lot of time on what's the structure of an atom, and then of a molecule, and the bonding that takes place between them, and all that. So it's the fundamental. Physics, obviously, well, some physics goes below that, I guess, but most physics is above that. And of course, all of biology anchors in atoms and molecules, and their behavior in a cell. And so, go ahead.
Is there an aspect of chemistry that particularly strikes you, where you think about the hand of God in it, not just in making it, but is there any aspect of chemistry that makes you think, wow, God is constantly maintaining?
Well, two things come to mind. In general, Einstein is, I believe this is a quote from Einstein, that he wasn't much of a believer that I know of, but he said, the laws of nature, there are hundreds of laws of nature that are very rigidly mathematical. Mm-hmm. And most of them would be in physics, and some of them are in chemistry, like gas laws. But one of the smartest guys who ever lived, said they give testimony to a creator, and I think, so that's certainly a general answer to your question. Just an interesting thing that comes to mind in terms of a specific answer, and it's not so much maybe maintaining the universe as is what allows us to have life as we know it on Earth. And spend a whole chapter on water, and I love this, because the characteristics of water, universal solvent, it's a liquid at most temperatures on Earth. It can be ice, it can be a gas. High specific heat, all these things without which we could not have life on Earth. All of that is based on, I can't do it very well, but on the shape of a water molecule. And there's an oxygen there. It's a bent molecule with a hydrogen on each side. And if it were straight, a simple little geometry thing, it would not have the properties that it has, and we could not have life on Earth. And so, I mean, how cool is that? That, you know, this angle instead of this angle, you know, with whatever number of water molecules on Earth, allows us to have an Earth, allows us to have life on Earth, you know? It turns out to be what's called a polar molecule. If it were straight, it would be non-polar, meaning greasy, and it would not dissolve all these things that it dissolves, and you couldn't have cells, and you know, oh my goodness, the ramifications are huge. And so that's the kind of fun thing that comes to mind when you ask a question like that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And, you know, it's always, you know, it's interesting, you know, whether I'm talking to science teachers or maybe you see a scientist in some sort of apologetics conversation, you know, there's always like one or two things that particularly delight them, right? Like they like to talk about the eye, or they like to talk about stars, or whatever the thing that really like just communicates the majesty and care of God to them. And it's an endless number of things upon which creation hinges. Like you can just pick almost anywhere, and it all hinges on that.
Yeah. Well, the periodic table too. The question the person asked was, maybe is there something unique to chemistry? And of course, all of chemistry is based on the periodic table. And again, the periodic table is not just a bunch of chemicals. I mean, there are layers and layers of order and organization. It's not just, you know, in proton number, which it is, but incredible layers of structure there that we didn't make. I mean, you know, scientists discovered it, you know, a couple hundred years ago, but no human was responsible for that, right? All we did was figure it out. And so,
well, you know, I actually kind of touches on a little. You know, I like to talk about words, and you know, one of the things that always, you know, because science as a capital S thing, you know, gets treated as a religion all on its own by many. And, you know, the word science, you know, we use it now as a corollary to knowledge.
Yeah.
But it's really closer to our word for awareness. Something like the periodic table is recognizing what God has done. Like now we are aware of it, where before we were not. And I think thinking that way shifts some of the unhealthy uses of, you know, science.
That's great.
Marks at that point.
Great, yeah. And
I'm sorry. You have a quote from C.S. Lewis in your teaching philosophy, one that's also a favorite of mine. C.S. Lewis says, "You have never talked to a mere mortal. It is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendor." And then you make a little comment off to the side after that. "I strive to treat each person with whom I deal with a love and respect due to an everlasting splendor." Obviously, you're connecting it to how you treat your students and deal with your students. So I'd love for you to just kind of talk about that broadly. But then how does that attitude come into your classroom?
Okay. Yeah, almost anything C.S. Lewis says is brilliant, huh? You could just pick anything.
I don't think one of these interviews has gone by where C.S. Lewis hasn't come up.
That's great. That's great. And I just finished studying actually with a friend of mine, Mere Christianity. We just went through it again. So, oh my goodness. Yeah, I would say that over the years, that this view of students has strengthened and intensified in me. That you know, maybe as a young teacher, you're focused on trying to get through the material and get through the class and that kind of thing, and the content is you're focused on that, and I guess as I've grown in the Lord and as I see increasingly the importance of His kingdom, and maybe that's a way to explain it. I increasingly have a kingdom mentality that my students are, you know, hopefully members of the kingdom of God, and they're either going to go on to a lifetime of effective work in the kingdom, or not. Or maybe they're going to be, you know, there's a spiritual battle. And so some of them are going to be sidelined by the enemy and they may be a believer, but not do too much, not be too dangerous to the enemy, that kind of thing. And so that's my perspective when I am viewing a student or a class. I'm very aware that that these are God's kids, and He has plans and purposes for them, and so does the enemy. So especially in your teenage years, everybody knows, there's so many important decisions and impressions are being made during those years. And
yes,
I mean, I would say most of us who follow the Lord, made that commitment or decision somewhere in high school or college. I haven't seen any numbers, but I would guess that's probably 90% of where those roots and where those decisions are made. And so, yeah, that's how I see them as.
Love it. Well, yeah, I'd like to, as we approach the end of our interview, I'd really like to lean into what you state as you describe as your fascination with the intersection of science and faith.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about that fascination, and then maybe also, like, do you do any work in the church academically where you talk about that intersection?
Okay. Well, I guess the simple term that I would use for that intersection is intelligent design. And so I love to talk for hours about intelligent design. So just stop me if you want. But intelligent design is not a religious or a Christian term or perspective. It is often accused of being that, but that is not the origin of the term or the meaning of the term. It is a completely secular term. And the origins of it, you probably know, or the modern day origin is William Paley, who said, if I run across a pocket watch in a field and pick it up, I don't know who made it or when or how or anything about it, but I can tell you one thing: nature didn't do that, right? Nature does not assemble pocket watches. And so when it comes to something like a cell or the periodic table or even one atom with the incredible details of the protons, neutrons, electrons, and how they work together, they show evidence of design. And so, and that everything I just said has nothing to do with Jesus or Christianity or the Bible. That is a strong, like this thing right here shows evidence of design, right? That is not a religious statement. That is a smart statement that nature does not put together iPhones, right? And so now, given that, it obviously has religious or metaphysical implications. Mm-hmm. And for Christians, that's an easy jump because we go, oh, well, that's exactly what my Bible says, right? That there's a creator. And so that's a very easy jump. I want to make sure that my students understand the difference, though, and that they know you don't need it. And I'm not being blasphemous here, but you don't need a Bible to argue for intelligent design. That's a strong scientific position by itself, very strong.
Well, and the Bible says that God reveals Himself through creation. It's the mental gymnastics lie on the side of those who try to argue against intelligent design. Now, so but why is it important to you to make that distinction? Is it the ability to have certain conversations?
It's that I don't want my students when they run into a secular teacher who will say, "Oh, you just believe that because you're a Christian, and your parents and your high school teachers have brainwashed you," and then they're tempted to throw it out. I want them to understand, no, my Bible is here, and I believe it for many reasons. It makes sense. There's archaeology. I also have faith. I love Jesus. Whatever. But there is also another entire body of evidence that I mentioned earlier has greatly helped to cement my faith. Mm-hmm. That stands alone, separate from that, called intelligent design, and to me that makes it more powerful because it is not dependent on faith. It's not right. It augments faith. That I think that's the answer to your question.
Yeah.
It augments faith. They work together, but it's not a faith-based position.
So by emphasizing that, you're effectively closing a back door into a young person's mind.
There you go.
Where they might not have actually thought of intelligent design as its own idea to be played with and messed around with and tested.
Yes.
Because they haven't done that, because it's always been fully integrated into their theology, they might think, well, if one thing would lead to another. So it's like a backdoor attack that you can block off.
Exactly. And I have my own life story. I'm an incarnation of that, I think,
which is what drives, your passion for this. You want to give these young people that same experience you had.
Exactly. You asked about my church involvement also. I'm quite involved in leadership in my church. I help to lead a discipleship mentoring program at Lake Avenue Church here in Pasadena, and I also serve on the adult ministry division, which helps to give oversight to various adult ministries. In terms of science, we don't do a lot. We did have we had a committee on which I served with. The nice thing is we have JPL scientists in our church. We have Caltech people. We have an amazing church and quite a bit of influence from science. And so we had some discussions a couple of years ago of what the church might do with all that. And then there was a sermon series kind of based on discussions from various scientists and educators in our church, and I enjoyed participating in that. So, but I don't think science per se has not been a big part of my church involvement.
It sounds like where you mostly express your passion for the intersection of science and faith is in the classroom itself.
Yeah, that's right.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you talking to us about this class, about the thought that you've put into it, and where the class is going. Because ultimately, you want your students to not only be able to manipulate certain elements or write out certain equations, but to, by learning to do that, know their God better.
That's right. That's the bottom line.
Wonderful. Well, thank you
thanks a lot. I appreciate your time and your good questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay on the line as we sign off, and we can chat a little bit afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.